So it's lovely to be here. I've come hotfoot from Wales, where I also run a small family farm, an organic permaculture pasture for life farm. So that also informs perhaps some of the comments I'm going to make today, as well as the work that we've done over the last 2 years in the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. And we have now published our reports, which I think are very beautiful. I think beauty does matter. We brought a few copies here with us, but just trying to limit what we're carrying and the amount of paper we're leaving lying around. You can also download them if you'd like to read them. The Commission was a 2-year independent inquiry funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and run out of the RSA in London, Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. Set up a couple of years ago, following the Brexit vote, a group of industry, business and NGO leaders got together and realised very quickly that the implications of that vote were huge across the food and the farming system. And they initially approached the government at the time to say, do we need a royal commission or a government commission to look into the issues in a really serious way? Government declined, and those industry leaders decided that that wasn't the right answer, and so they would organise an independent inquiry with some real substance behind it. So it's chaired by SERA in Cheshire, and we have 14 other commissioners who come from a whole range of organisations in food, in retail, in farming, environment, tourism and leisure, and economics. They're a really amazing bunch of commissioners who've really held our feet to the fire in terms of how we do our work. So our mandate was to inquire into how we can design safer and more secure systems for food and farming, whilst also helping to regenerate and revitalise rural communities and rural economies. But as if that mandate wasn't big enough, we spread our wings even further. We also brought in the bodies of work around public health, economics, and how we use the countryside in all sorts of different ways. And so some folks say, you spread yourselves too thinly. That is, too broad a remit to be able to focus on the critical issues. We say, actually, none of us live our lives in policy or academic silos. We live our lives completely capable of navigating all of the different issues in food or in farming or in health and education in rural communities. And so somebody has to do the work that holds that whole system in view, and that's what we've sought to do. And the other thing that I think was quite distinctive about the way that we went about our work was how we did our consultation, how we conducted our inquiry. We did all the things that an inquiry normally does. We called for evidence, we looked at the whole of the policy landscape to see what other people were saying, not just in the UK but around the world. And we conducted a whole series of workshops with experts from NGOs, businesses and so on. But we also travelled the UK on a bicycle. And it was really important for us to do that. Some people are going, you did what? We did exactly that. What was important to us was that instead of doing consultation in the way that it is often done, kind of inviting people to rather grim hotels on the edges of towns at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night and asking them to sit round tables with post-its and sticky dots, and then wondering why people just don't turn up because they've got better things to do. We would just go out to speak to people where they are, in their homes, in their businesses, in their communities, on farms, in community groups, in schools. And it took us 9 months, and 27 cyclists, 27 researchers did the work, and we generated an enormous amount of data, really fascinating and extraordinary data, that tells the story of how people are feeling in their communities right now, but it also tells the story about what people are already doing to tackle some of the critical issues that we're facing. So I'm going to whiz quickly through, mindful of time, to what all that culminated in. Although this commission was set up to deal with the huge questions brought about by the Brexit vote, we very quickly realised that the issues we needed to deal with transcend Brexit. The climate crisis, the nature crisis, the crisis in public health, the enormous rise in diet-related illnesses, and the way our rural communities are feeling disconnected from policies that affect them. We came up with 15 recommendations in 3 groups, 3 buckets. The first is called Healthy Food is Everybody's Business. And the recommendations there are all about levelling the playing field for a fair food system. We took note of the World Health Organization's comments that in their view, the biggest risk to public and planetary health is an unregulated global agribusiness sector. We recognise really clearly that the way that we produce food at the moment is not fair and it's not equitable. The risks are borne by many and the rewards are reaped by few, and that needs to change. The second set of our recommendations are grouped under the heading Farming can be a force for change. In fact, farming must be a force for change. Farmers told us on our travels that they are feeling beleaguered and actually really quite distressed, having become the bad guys in the debates about the climate crisis and the climate emergency. But the reality is, without farmers, none of us would be eating the snacks that we're going to be having later. None of us would have had breakfast. Without farmers, we will not have food on our plates. And farming can be a vital force for change. The right kind of farming can be a force for change. So we have recommended that farmers and other stakeholders work together to develop a transition plan to regenerative farming systems that will replenish our ecosystems, but also protect rural communities and help rural communities regenerate. Our last bucket of recommendations are called A Countryside That Works for All. And in that, we talk about the need to have some really quite serious conversations about how we use our land. That's become an incredibly polarised debate, rewilding versus agriculture, or the national parks versus sustainable intensification. That's not helping anybody. We need a better, more thoughtfully, more evidence-based, mediated conversation, not just at the policy level, which tends to centre in Whitehall and Westminster, but involves communities who very often have the really grounded knowledge that's needed to make these conversations sustainable and robust. And in that set of recommendations, we also talk about the skills that we need for a regenerative economy. Very often the skills debate in the countryside or in the food and farming sector focuses on what industry needs. We ask, what does the world need from us right now? What are the skills we need to grow and develop and sustain for a more regenerative future? And lastly, we talk about a national nature service. We are all, I think, inspired by the incredible energy that young people are bringing to hold us to account for the decisions that we're making right now. And we think there are things that they can do. It's great that they are on the streets outside Parliament. Tragically, government's not there to listen to them. But there are many, many other things that we think young people can do and would like to do to help us really kickstart the transition we need for climate and nature-friendly agriculture. So I'll pause there.